So we cut our boards to 2 inches width at the table saw, and then I took them over to the chop saw and cut them both at 11 inches. So if I had a 20-inch board, I cut it at 11 inches. This one's the 11 inch and it leaves me over 9 inches, which is my short sides of my picture frame. So now we're going to actually lay out where our joints are going to be. So as you can see, we've got it drawn out on the board up here. We've got our mortise and tenon joint, biscuit joint, here's a lap joint, and another biscuit joint. So I'm going to lay out my boards on the table in front of me. I'll lay them out flat like this. And then I'm going to number them. So this corner, I'll start at the top corner. This will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Now once I've done that, I now know, looking at my picture, and you'll have this in your notebook or it'll be online to download, which joint we're going to start with first. So I'm going to start with the mortise and tenon. So once I've numbered my pieces, I'm going to grab number 1 and number 8, and this will be the first joint that we work on. We're going to work on the mortise and tenon joint. So I'll show you how to do number 1, and then we'll move on. So we've laid out our pieces, we've numbered them. We're going to grab number 1, and we're going to work on our mortise and tenon joint. The first piece we're going to do is the mortise part of our mortise and tenon joint. So in the end it'll look like this. So to do this, we're going to use our mortise jig. We're going to set our blade height at 2 inches because we want to hog out a slit that is 2 inches deep. We just cut these at 2 inches, so we're just going to use this, lay it next to the blade, and we're going to bring it up to the top edge. Now we know that our blade is set at a 2-inch depth. Make sure you have your number 1 piece, and we're going to put that in the jig. Make sure it's back against the fence, and then we'll tighten it up. So now that I have it in place, I'm going to push it through and then back it out, and then I'm going to loosen this and flip the board around, simply twist it around. I'm going to tighten it up again, making sure it's tight against the back of the fence, and I'm going to run it through again, and that'll finish out my cut. So now we're going to take this over to the sled and cut off the 45-degree miter. So I've laid out my picture frame again because I want to make sure that I don't get confused on which way my angle needs to be cut. So I'm just going to lightly run a pencil line somewhere close, it doesn't need to be exact, just so I know that I need to cut this section off. Now that I know which way my angle needs to run, I know that I need to put it on this side of the jig. And I'm going to push it forward until my blade lines up with the corner here so that I know I'm cutting off enough. And then I'm going to lock it down. It's critical when you're lining this up that the right side of the blade lines up exactly with this point here, because your slit is only 2 inches deep, and for this to work correctly, this needs to be pretty exact. So once I have that lined up, it looks pretty good. I'm going to make sure it's tight against the jig this way, and then I'm going to lock it in. So I'm going to go ahead and run it through. I am going to run it just past this point. Once I have cut all the way through, I'm going to make sure I still have both hands on my jig, and I'm going to just pull it back. You can go all the way through, but your blade will end up coming out this side of the jig, so don't push it too far. So we finished cutting the angle on our mortise piece. Now we're going to take our number 8 piece and work on the tenon part of our joint. So again, just to make sure I cut it at the right angle, I'm just going to lay that on there and mark across here so that I know that's the angle I need. And then I'm going to bring it over to the jig. And on this one, I'm just hollowing out 1/3 of the material on either side. So I'm going to set, this is 3/4 of an inch thick, so I'm going to set my blade height for 1/4 of an inch, so that it only cuts 1/4 of an inch in. Again, it's important to remember to make sure you line I'm lining the left side of the blade up with the very corner of my piece, the very tip. And actually, I need to adjust this just a bit. If it's not lined up, it'll make your joint not fit together as nicely. Again, make sure it's tight against this as well. We'll go ahead and run it through. Okay, so now I have my 2 lines cut on either side. It's cut in 1/4 of an inch, which leaves 1/4 of an inch in the middle. I'm going to take it over to my dado blade, and I'm going to hog out the rest of this material. The reason that we put these lines in there first with just the single blade is because you're using a miter gauge on the dado blade, and it has a tendency to slip just a little bit, and it'll chip out you won't have a straight line. It could chip this out, and it'll make your joint messy. Okay, so we're here at the dado blade. We've got the height set to 1/4 of an inch, and we're just going to hog out the rest of this material. I've got 2 different miter gauges here set up to do opposite angles, so that I don't have to worry about switching this one around. It just goes faster. I'm going to make sure this is the right angle, and then I'm going to line up. I can see the line that I made earlier on the underside. I'm going to line up the edge of that with the edge of this blade, so that I'm hogging out just the amount of material that I need this side of the line that we made earlier on the other table saw. You're going to want to make sure you hold on to this. It has a tendency to want to slide, so hold it against this as well as pushing down as you push it through. So every time before I use this, I want to make sure that it's a true 45-degree angle, because again, it's critical for your joints to line up. So I'll just take a speed square and I'll place it against the fence and against my board here and make sure that there's no gaps. And it looks pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it. I'm going to line this up, the edge of this line, right up with the edge of my blade here. That way I don't go too far that way and chip out the original line that I made on the other table saw. When you go through this, you're going to want to make sure that you're pushing down as well as holding it in. This wood can have a tendency to want to slide on you because it is at an angle and you're pushing it through the blade, so it has some friction. So just make sure you've got a good grip on it as you're pushing it through, holding onto the handle, and you should be good to go.